Welcome to Blueprints for Liberty, Designing the Freedom Cities of Tomorrow. This is a podcast that explores the visionary concept of freedom cities and how we can create living environments that prioritize individual liberty, social harmony, and equal opportunities for all. We look back through history to see how the past informs the future and how people can self-organize in their communities to support
Welcome. We are so
self-sufficiency.
excited to have Dan
We also
McMillan
look
with us
to
today.
develop leaders
He
that are
is,
moral
I
and
believe, he'll
ethical in a
correct me if
world
I'm
that
wrong,
is
the
spinning out
founder
of
of Save
control.
Democracy in
Tune in
America.
to be part of the
He's
conversation
the founder and
shaping the
executive
future of our
director,
communities.
and he's a writer. He's based out of New York City. He has a PhD in German history from Columbia University and a law degree from Fordham. He worked on a book. He is a book editor, I should say, and a history professor, which, you know me, I love history and I love history professors. Also served as a prosecuting attorney. He left his job at the Brooklyn DA's office to become a writer. And in 2014, he published his first book. They acclaimed, "How Could This Happen? Explaining the Holocaust." So on that note, I will say the reason that I invited him here is partially in our conversations. He's very optimistic about our country. And even though both sides of the aisle will tell you we're out to save democracy, I think he has some ideas that the politicians haven't raised and ideas that I believe are empowering to Americans. And so on that note, I'll let him do a little more introduction of himself, and then he can just jump right in to tell us how he plans to save democracy.
Well, thank you so much for that gracious introduction, Cheryl. So, after I published my Holocaust book, I thought my second book was going to be about money and politics and how it's damaged our political system and how it's basically robbed us of our voice in government. And I did about several hundred pages of writing in different unpublished writing in different pockets and more than 6 years of research. In the spring of 2020, I decided that publishing another book was not going to move the needle, and that ultimately the only way we're going to get reform on the money problem is for, a massive number of Americans on both sides of the aisle to stand up and say, we've had enough of government for sale and we want a reform. We want change. Because the thing is, the folks in Washington are now so thoroughly dependent on their donors. They can't give us reform of money in politics. They can't fight against money in politics. They're too busy raising it. And that's the catch-22 that has kept our political system stuck in this sort of downward spiral that it's been in for decades. That's accelerated in the last 10 years, but that really for my whole adult life since 1980, I and the people around me have felt, that the political system has grown more and more dysfunctional, that the conversation has grown more and more divorced from our needs and from what the American people want, that the political system has become less and less representative of the people. And the American people have become more and more mistrustful of people in politics and increasingly sort of disgusted with politicians and with the whole political system. I think that probably the most important thing about, one of the things that's very heartening I've seen is that polls are showing, an ever sort of growing majority of Americans on both sides of the aisle. And it's pretty much the same percentages of Republicans and Democrats, saying things like big donors, special interests have far too much interest in politics. Politicians don't really listen to people like me. Money in politics is a big problem we need to address. We're talking about majorities of 60, 70%, giving these kinds of answers in polls. So public awareness of the problem of money is growing. And, for me, is just further confirmation of the fundamental good sense of the American people and of the voters. The folks in Washington seem to think that we're children, and they don't seem to have a very high opinion of our intelligence. But I know different, and certainly believe different, and have learned different in all my political work. And yet, even I think most Americans, and even people who study politics professionally, nonetheless underestimate the damage done by money by, say, a factor of 10, just to pull a number out of the air. They drastically underestimate it. And the reason that people overlook most of the damage done by money is that most of the damage is an absence, not a presence. It's all the problems, issues that we should be talking about good policy ideas that we ought to be debating, promising potential leaders who never run or never even enter the political conversation, because those issues, those policies, those leaders would not attract the campaign cash that you need to get a campaign off the ground. And so consequently, I guess another way to put it is that candidates self-censor to avoid alienating potential sources of campaign cash. By default, campaign donors, heavy campaign donors who can write big checks, choose the candidates that we're allowed to vote for and limit what policies these candidates can implement once in office. And this problem has been growing since the 1980s, but the cost of elections, especially at the national level, has skyrocketed in the last 10 years. For example, from 2016 into 2020, the federal elections, White House and Congress, more than doubled in inflation-adjusted dollars from $7 billion to $14.4 billion. To look at it from the viewpoint of a candidate, if you want to challenge an incumbent in the House of Representatives, it's hard to see how you could do that with less than $2 million. And ideally, you'd want to raise more than that. The minimum price of admission to the Senate is $10 million, but really campaigns that cost 20, 30, 40, 50 million are far more common. And then in hotly contested elections where a lot of money comes in out of state, like, for example, the two special elections in Georgia in 2020, where Warnock and Ossoff were elected, a total of $440 million was spent by all candidates in that election put together. Now, that money does not come from you and me. It comes from the kind of people who can write checks for 50,000, $500,000. Some people write checks for 5 million or more. And because, you know, the need for campaign cash has grown so desperate that now once they get to Washington, our elected representatives are effectively hogtied by the favors they owe all their donors, and even more so by the need to self-censor to avoid alienating any potential future donor, because they have to go back and raise a comparable amount of money for their reelection campaign. It was reported, and this was 8 years ago, when the cost of campaigns was much lower than now, that your typical member of Congress spent at least 30 hours a week on the phone in dedicated call centers set up by the two parties, raising money for the next reelection campaign instead of doing their jobs. And they actually have a term for it. They call it dialing for dollars. And so basically the pressure to raise money is so constant now and so insistent that effectively it's, you know, for every good idea out there, and there's no shortage of well-meaning Americans with leadership qualities and good ideas, you know, good idea out there for getting us affordable health care, for getting us better schools, for cutting, you know, wasteful spending and doing whatever else we have to do to, you know, stop borrowing $2 trillion a year to fix infrastructure, to create jobs and build a middle class. For every good idea out there, there's going to be a group of donors whose short-term financial interest is going to be badly affected by this, and who will block that possible reform. And so, you know, and the donors don't even have to pick up the phone and call, you know, candidates, because the candidates already know what not to say. And so one consequence, I think, that indirectly this is part of what has driven the escalating polarization in our politics, and the escalating partisan anger, and the overwhelmingly negative messaging from both parties, because the need to satisfy donors, the need to raise money has taken pretty much all meaningful positive policy programs, you know, off the table. You know, any sort of, you know, so both parties in theory have a program, but as far as an achievable program that could actually address the full range of issues that we've been kicking the can down the road on in this country for so many years, neither party really can do it. There's no way forward anymore. So all they have left to offer us is anger. And both parties have defaulted to messaging that is overwhelmingly negative. I mean, when you think about it, you know, boiled down to its essentials, the top line message of both major parties in this election is identical. If the other side wins, the world is going to end. Biden campaign compares Donald Trump to Hitler and says he's going to impose a dictatorship. The Trump campaign and their allies say that Biden is a Marxist and he wants a Marxist dictatorship. Admittedly, to be fair to Biden, I mean, Donald Trump did say he wants to be a dictator, and he did talk about wanting to lock up his political opponents. And so it's kind of understandable that people are frightened. But the fact is that warning us of a bad outcome is not enough. We need the parties to show us how our lives are going to be better. We need to have a conversation about how to fix what's wrong with the country, and also to build on the many things that are right, and to seize our opportunities. I don't know if you've noticed this too, Cheryl, but you notice no one really talks anymore in this country about opportunities, about like great things that could happen, or how our country can become, how we could restore the middle class, or how we could become the leading exporter of the next generation of high value added manufacturing goods that could produce, high skilled, high paying jobs to rebuild the middle class. You don't hear anything about opportunities. It's all about problems. And it's sort of, can we avoid disaster, or can we fend off catastrophe? And, this negative messaging, the main reason you should vote for me is that because if you vote for the other guys, the world will end. This is not a message of hope for the American people. It's really an admission of defeat and failure by the political class on both sides of the aisle. And, they seem blissfully unaware that they have declared bankruptcy and admitted failure, but that's what they've done. And one other thing I'd like to say, I haven't let you get a word in edgewise, but I want to sort of make one further point, and then I want to sort of stop and see what thoughts you have, and see what, whether my ideas make sense to you, and if you have follow-up questions. But I also want to say that you find that prejudice of varied kinds is playing a more visible role in our politics. And of course, we've also seen a rise in hate speech and hate crime, and a spike in anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic incidents that are very disturbing. And I think that some of this also indirectly comes from the money, because, Cheryl, we've always been the most diverse of the world's democracies, racially, ethnically, linguistically, culturally, and religion. And so a kind of a favored way that sort of entrenched powerful interests, people with wealth, have stayed on top is divide and conquer. Keep all the working class Americans from recognizing that, hey, all of us who are sort of at this level, sort of working class people, we kind of all have the same economic needs, and we're all getting the short end of the stick economically, and we got to get together and sort of demand some satisfaction from our government. Well, the way that so often that's been prevented, or the folks on top have avoided having to serve us and take care of us or deal with our concerns, is to say, well, you're not working class, you're white. You're not working class, you're Black. You're not working class, you're Christian. You're not working class, you're a Muslim, or you're not a Christian. Another way to put it is, there's a gross oversimplification, but I think for a number of years, for a long time now, really, from the Republican Party, a common sort of message, kind of maybe the dominant message is, your problem is not, say, the Wall Street firms that pay for my campaigns and all my colleagues' campaigns, and that crashed the economy in 2008, so you lost your house in foreclosure, and who don't pay their fair share in taxes, so you end up paying a larger share maybe than you should. No, your problem is minorities who suck up your tax dollars by sponging off government programs. Your problem is immigrants who want to steal your job. Your problem is godless advocates of abortion on demand who don't respect your religious faith. And the Democratic message is only a little bit different. Your problem is not the Wall Street firms. Your problem is racist, gun-toting rednecks in flyover country who, will never give you a chance, will always hate you for the color of your skin or who you love, and who don't care if your child gets slaughtered at a school shooting, and want to ram their religious faith down, their Christian beliefs down your throat. And, all these issues are important. The place of religion in American life is important. The decline in religious faith and religious observance is very important. And I personally think it's a terrible loss for our society. I don't know what exactly we can do about it, but it is, something that we ought to be talking about. Immigration is very important. Abortion, of course, could not be more important. It's a moral issue of national importance. But it's also true that both parties milk these issues for anger instead of looking for solutions. And both parties increasingly, they stereotype the voters of the other side. And over time, this is having an effect. They are succeeding in turning Americans against each other. And you do see in opinion polls, a recent poll where, I mean, it was north of 60% in both cases that, Democratic voters thinking that Republican voters are like more likely to be, or immoral, or more likely to be immoral, and Republican voters saying the same thing about Democratic voters. But I refuse, and the elite narrative is, oh, the voters are so angry and therefore politics is becoming angry. But that doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense for two reasons. One is they don't listen to us and we have very little influence on what they do. So it's hard to see how we drive this. And also 330 million people don't spontaneously become more angry or cranky, This is the anger in our politics and the sort of negative ways that Democrats and Republicans, I think, more and more can stereotype each other is poison that is generated at the political level. And then it's for political reasons. And I think in partly, a lot of it from the perverted incentives of this money-driven political system, the reasons that I've described. Anyway, I've run my mouth for quite some time. I haven't let you get a word in edgewise. So why not just take a step back and, what do you think of these ideas, and do you have any questions?
Oh, I have lots of thoughts, always do, and some questions, but I very, everything you've said, I agree with. I remember, I think one of the most disheartening things to me was, and I'll step back for just a second, in the mid 1970s, I remember there was, they wanted to pass the Equal Rights Amendment.
Yeah.
There was this major campaign of people writing in to express their views.
Yeah.
Whether you agree or disagree with it doesn't really matter at this stage of the game, because what happened was enough people made their voices heard, and that was ultimately what killed it, because people made their voices heard. And to some degree, the politicians, I wouldn't say the politicians per se, but the system somehow listened to that. Just recently, there's been several grassroots campaigns that I've been involved in that have called our senators, written our congressmen, done all of that, and just overwhelmed the system with our voices. And what they did on Capitol Hill, because they still have landline phones, I guess, I don't know if you want to call them landlines, they picked up the phones and took them off the hook.
Really?
Yeah.
So that you can't call your senator anymore.
Yeah. So if you overwhelm the system and say, hey, these, this is our voice, this is what we want, this is, like I said, it doesn't really matter what the issue is. What they're saying is, we don't want to listen to you. We've already made up our minds, and we have other people who are driving this agenda. And I do agree that it's gotten significantly worse, since, the 70s, 80s, that time frame. But even still, being a professor of history, you kind of can, I'm sure, agree. Politics has always been a blood sport, and if we go clear back to the early days of our founding of our country, I mean, Aaron Burr got shot, by his political opponent. I don't pretend to think that back then is as bad as it was today, as it is today. But it still is. I think part of the reason is because of the media. I think the media plays a huge role in driving this division. And it doesn't matter which side of the political spectrum you're on, depends on which, if you listen to this media, you're going to hear how bad these people are. If you listen to this media, you're going to hear how bad the other side is. And they humanize each other. And but what's interesting to me is I have people who think totally different than I do politically. We're worlds apart on where we are politically. And yet we're still friends. We still hang out together. We still have conversations. Yeah. And I highly respect her. and I understand where her ideas and her thought processes come from. She thinks the same of me. And it's rare. It's interesting. It's rare to have that kind of relationship with other people, but it isn't rare. Do you know what I mean? It's rare to have it with, it's becoming more and more rare, unfortunately. And I just think, like even when we have the debates, you have to poll at a certain number. You have to have so many donations from so many people. And why? Why? If I'm running for president, why can't I be on the stage? Why? Even if there's 20 people, then there's 20 people. And it'll filter down, who wants to listen to 20 people for 5 hours? I must admit, it's kind of would be interesting. But still, I don't think that the criteria for being on the stage should be how much money you can raise or, what your poll numbers are, because your poll numbers might simply be a reflection of the fact that you don't have a lot of money and you're not getting a lot of traction because you're not getting enough media attention. The media hasn't dubbed you as their darling.
Well, also, if you haven't raised money up to a certain level, the media decide that you're not viable. That's usually kind of the term. And then you get you get no coverage, and the coverage you do get is disparaging. They'll talk about you as if you're sort of a wingnut, or they'll describe your campaign as quixotic, or delusional or whatever. I mean, we have had some pretty weird people running. It was also true, but the fact is, the thing is, without the money, I mean, money having more money than your opponent doesn't guarantee victory, but without a very large amount of money, you are not viable for national office, increasingly for state office too. So, and that's really, in that sense, the money is the donors are the gatekeepers. Again, that's really kind of how they choose the candidates and limit. So now that I've gotten everyone thoroughly depressed, maybe we should talk about my dastardly plot to save the Republic and how I think we can fix this.
I think so, but I would also like you to kind of frame it a little bit from this aspect. I've said for, I don't know, a long time, decades, that we as the population are pawns in their game. They're the kings and queens on the chessboard. We're the pawns. And I do believe we have reached a point where they've eliminated all the pawns on the chessboard. We are no longer even needed. And I don't believe, I don't want to go down the whole rabbit hole of, election integrity and everything, but I don't believe that our votes, whether they don't count because of all the money involved, or whether they simply don't count because they don't count.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
And so what hope do we have of resurrecting this when all that's left on the chessboard are the kings and queens?
I still think that they do need to get our vote to get into office. I mean, of course, there is the dispute about whether there has been election fraud, and I actually am not going to comment on that because I need to remain completely nonpartisan, and that has become a hotly disputed partisan issue. But I think we'll put it this way, in all the midterm elections, hardly anyone claimed that there'd been voting fraud. It seemed like everyone felt that the votes were counted, at least that the votes were counted accurately. They may not have been happy with the result, but I didn't really hear. I mean, there were a few people who lost who claimed that there'd been fraud, but it didn't take hold. It wasn't really something that people seem concerned about. So I tend to think that, if we assert ourselves, they're going to need our vote to get into office. The question is, so let me, and I think that, there is already a massive constituency for fundamental change, because I think, a great majority of Americans on both sides of the aisle have been saying for a long time that this isn't working and that we're fed up with politics as usual. And, starting, I think, particularly in 2008, there have been candidates who've gotten a huge amount of mileage out of being quote unquote change candidates. Barack Obama, change you can believe in, and yes, we can. And there were never any details about what this change was going to be, but people had this expectation and hope that somehow fundamentally things were going to get better, that the political system was going to work, it was going to be fair. And then in 2016, it's interesting, on both sides of the aisle, you had change candidates running against the system. You had Donald Trump on the Republican side, Bernie Sanders on the Democratic side. And Trump said Trump was going to drain the swamp. Sanders even promised us a revolution. Bernie was there with his revolution again in 2020. Elizabeth Warren, maybe with revolution light, if you want to be snarky about it. I had a soft spot for her, but in any case, but none of these change candidates ever had a plan for change, any details. They didn't even tell us what needed to be changed. And the reason they had no plan for change is that what needs changing above all is how candidates pay for the sky high cost of these election campaigns. What needs changing is our government being for sale to campaign donors. And these candidates could not fight the money because they were too busy raising it. And that, again, that really is the catch-22 that has kept our political system kind of on this downslope for so many years. And it's also been a problem that most Americans have been unable to understand, precisely for the reason I said, because you can't fight what you can't see. And the way that the self-censorship by money has kind of hollowed out the conversation and foreclosed all options and turned the whole political conversation into empty slogans the way it has, that's not only is that something that's invisible, it's kind of unimaginable. No one has known that it's there. No one has pointed it out. And so that's why things have gotten as bad as they have. But the thing is, all I think that the American people really need is a concrete, practical, achievable, first step, that, a rallying point, an actual plan for change that would bring substantial change and that Republicans and Democrats can agree on. And, as I say, I did all this research for this book. Part of what I wanted to do is to find what's the best reform idea out there. And I finally came across this idea of voter dollars. It's also been called democracy dollars or democracy vouchers. And they've been using it in Seattle since 2017 for city elections, and quite successfully. It's really done some good things for the city. And the principle is wonderfully simple. It's, since the only people with really any influence in Washington anymore are heavy campaign donors, we make ourselves the donors. And the government would give every registered voter an online account of campaign cash, $100 per voter in a presidential year, $50 per voter in the midterms, which are cheaper. Can't take the money out and spend it, but you go online and assign it to the candidates you want to support. You can't, and once we have the system, candidates who want to serve us can raise enough money from us to run a competitive campaign, and their opponents no longer have much excuse for taking money from big business and billionaires, labor unions, any kind of special interest. Now, the reason also why the only path to fixing the system is public financing mechanism, because the Supreme Court decided already back in the 70s that money spent to influence elections, like through donations or by buying ads for someone, is itself free speech, protected by the First Amendment. And up to that point, free speech meant what you and I are doing. We exchange our ideas, we express our opinion, we speak freely. It didn't include the money that you might spend to purchase an audience for your speech by buying campaign ads, or more to the point these days, by drowning out someone else's speech by, with $20 million in an ad buy. So because of that, the court just sort of built on that very bad idea. Citizens United is one of the more recent cases that kind of took that bad idea to its most ridiculous conclusion. So they won't let us limit anyone's donation or spending. So the only path to a game-changing reform is a public financing mechanism where we make an alternative pool available to candidates that's controlled by us, the people. And that's really the way forward. Now, one objection people have raised to this, they say, well, if we're not allowed to limit what the billionaires give, won't they just swamp the system with more billions? And it's worth noting that actually Jeff Bezos and his cronies tried that in Seattle in 2018. They decided they wanted a city council that was more to their liking, and they put $1.5 million into 7 city council races, which was unprecedented. And the people of Seattle, having already been sort of educated about the importance of money in politics by the campaign, it was a ballot initiative campaign that established the democracy voucher system there. They understood, holy cow, these guys trying to buy our government. And it completely backfired on Bezos. Everyone was outraged. His candidates went down to defeat. And so I think that going forward, even though strictly speaking, we can't prevent billionaires and special interests from throwing money at candidates who accept that help, I think are probably going to find that it's politically toxic. And, none of us has a crystal ball, but at a minimum, what it does is it levels the playing field enough so that people who want to serve us can get a viable campaign off the ground. And also what's nice about it is that we can get Americans, from all walks of life. Right now, the Congress is a millionaires club because to challenge an incumbent, you kind of have to be a millionaire with millionaire friends. So you can hold a fundraiser at the country club that you all belong to. But now if you've got, especially if you've got a little social media savvy and can get the word out that way, if you've got some good ideas and good people skills and you've got the gumption to lead, we can get local primary care physicians, we can get nurses, we can get school teachers, police officers, fire chiefs, small business owners, Americans from all walks of life, so that all of our needs and our interests and our point of view and our ideas are represented in the government. We'll get much better people in Congress because we have a much bigger talent pool. Right now, the talent pool is millionaires. There are only so many of them. So it's also not surprising that some of the people in Congress are behaving in a way that's not too impressive these days. So that's the voter dollars concept. Now, as I said before, Washington's not going to give this to us. I don't waste a minute of my time calling my senator or my representative, my senators or my representative, or trying to lobby them, because even if they wanted to help me, they couldn't, because they're trapped. They're stuck on the fundraising treadmill. And I think a lot of those people in Washington would like nothing better than to get off the fundraising treadmill and actually do the right thing and serve the common good. But they can't. They're stuck. So we, the people, one way of describing what we have to do is we kind of need to we need to set the folks in Washington free to serve us. But what does that mean? We need massive support. When I mean massive, I think the only way this happens is if the money problem and the voter dollar solution becomes a top 5 issue in the national conversation in a presidential election year. And that's, and a lot of people I talk to just think that's an impossibly heavy lift. And I understand that, but I think they're wrong, because again, I think Americans, I think the overwhelming majority of us, regardless of party, we know this isn't working. We want this to change. We want government by the people. We want our rightful say in how we are governed. We're Americans. We're the people who invented democracy. It's not right. This current system is un-American, really, among many other things that it is. And the thing about voter dollars is it has so many things going for it. You can summarize it in 4 words: make voters the donors. It's common sense. Whoever pays the piper calls the tune. If we want to call the tune in Washington, we're going to have to pay that piper. We're going to have to fund those campaigns. It directly empowers voters. Right now, so many Americans feel so discouraged. We feel powerless because to a very large degree, we are powerless. We should still all vote. And it does matter who's the next president and who controls Congress. But ultimately, our vote doesn't count for anywhere near what it deserves to count, what it should, what our founding fathers wanted to count for. And what this does is it says here, we will literally put the coin of political influence into your hands to do as you see fit. And candidates are going to have to come to you and ask you not only for your vote, but for something they need a lot more urgently, which is the cash, without which they can't ask anyone for their vote. So it really kind of shows people this is how you get back in the driver's seat. And I think finally, best of all, this is something that I find absolutely has bipartisan support. I get as much enthusiasm from Republicans as I do from Democrats. sometimes there's a little hesitation among Republicans because if you say the words campaign finance reform, that's sort of coded as a Democratic Party wish list item. But the reality is that no one in either party in Washington has done anything meaningful on money in politics since McCain-Feingold in 2002. That was a bipartisan, law in 2002. There have been a few people on the left, like Bernie Sanders, who've made a little noise about money in politics, but they haven't offered a solution. And they're going to be making a lot less noise going forward because they're desperate for money also. And the thing is, no matter how much we disagree on abortion, guns, any other issue, none of us are okay with our government being for sale. And I've demonstrated the cross-partisan appeal of this in a number of ways. I got a lot of different data that show this. One is that I've had almost 100 media interviews on outlets that run the gamut from very progressive to very conservative, probably 60% to 2/3 on conservative talk radio, because talk radio leans more conservative. And, even though, they're Republicans and supposedly campaign finance reform is something Democrats want, I explain this to them and I just talk about money in politics, and they are very enthusiastic about this. In fact, and frankly, I've spoken by now to at least 1,000 Americans, one-on-one or in small groups, since I started this. And Americans from different parts of the country, all walks of life, all political stripes, I'd say 95% of the people I talk to just love this idea. And they agree with me, oh God, money's a huge problem. Voter dollars, great idea. It's so practical, so common sense. Most of those people say in the next sentence, but you'll never make it happen. But, my rejoinder to that is, well, if everyone thinks it's a great idea, then how do we not make it happen? How is it impossible? But beyond that, but getting back to its political, another reason that I know, finally, that maybe the most scientific reason I know that it has cross-partisan appeal is I paid for a detailed survey of 700 New Hampshire voters in last year, very detailed survey, and about money in politics. I found sky-high levels of outrage about money in politics across the board, and very receptive audience. It was like we presented, first you present, talk about money in politics, present voter dollars reform. What's your initial impression? Then, and we we figure that out. Then we tested a bunch of different messages about voter dollars on them, and then asked them at the end of the survey, do you approve or disapprove? And we had majority approval across the board, stronger among independents and Democrats than among Republicans, but still a majority among Republicans. I don't want to overplay this. A lot of this support is simply somewhat support, but this is the first time these people have ever heard of this idea. And you don't win everyone over to an innovative, important new idea the first time they hear about it. They got to hear about it 4 or 5 times. And one other thing, I guess, and what I've really been finding and leaning into more and more is that this is a unifying issue that can bring us together and help kind of dial back the partisan anger, because it's, we're all, what I like to say, whatever I can, is that, our fellow Americans are not the enemy. The money's the enemy, and it's the enemy of us all. It's even the enemy of the donors who give it, because the system has become so unstable, even they don't get what they need. And that's another reason why people tell me, once you get traction, you'll be crushed under an avalanche of big money and negative advertising. But the thing is, and yeah, look, I don't check my mailbox on a daily basis looking for a fat check from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce or Koch Industries to support my undertaking. But these people aren't dumb. They know the political system isn't working. And I think that they can see from our messaging that this is not directed against them. Because I don't really spend a lot of time, I take a few shots at the healthcare industry because they're a soft target and everyone's mad about it. But fundamentally, this is not about, my argument is not that the people, the donors who give the money or the politicians who take it, that these are evil people. It's that the money has a dynamic of its own. If you want to play in politics, these are the rules. You're a politician, you got to raise money. If you run a corporation and you don't hire lobbyists and lay a lot of money on politicians, you're forfeiting an advantage to your competitors and you're not doing your job. We're all trapped in this system. And I think the other thing that's especially unifying about this and it's really the reason I got into this, is that what has inspired me really to do this, to make this my mission in life, which it has been since 2020, and it will be really, I think, until we have a voter dollars reform. I mean, if we haven't really made a lot of progress by 2032, maybe I'll reevaluate. I'll be 72 years old then, but at least for the time being, this is my life. This is what I do. Is that, we live in a country unlike any other, and I appreciate this especially because my expertise as an historian is that I was German history, and so I'm able to look at our country and lay it alongside countries that are comparable, other wealthy democracies. Other countries that industrialized in the first wave and that were prosperous and first, became democracies. And when you have that frame of reference, you can see how remarkable this country is, because every other country in the world, membership in the nation, belonging to the nation, depends on race, religion, ethnicity, culture, language, usually a combination of these factors, and not here. Being an American has nothing to do with the color of your skin or the language you speak. Being an American is about the ideals that the country stands for. For me, the holy trinity of American ideals is individual freedom, equality of opportunity, government by the people, which we invented. And you look at our history, for me, this, at least, hundreds of thousands, 800,000 Americans, by my count, have given their lives in wars fought for the freedom of others. I mean, our freedom has not been under credible, we were attacked in Pearl Harbor, but our freedom was not under credible military threat since the War of 1812. That was the last time that foreign troops stood on American soil in any number. And I mean, we didn't have to fight Hitler. We didn't fight Hitler out of self-interest. We did it because ideals make us Americans, and fighting for these ideals is what Americans do. And you look through our history, we have a capacity for idealism and for altruism and for self-sacrifice in the service of these noble ideals that you will not find in any other country in the history of no other people. And, I'm not saying this to pat ourselves on the back, and it's certainly not saying this to look down on other peoples. I mean, for one thing, I don't see how we look down on other peoples when they are we and we are they. I mean, most of the world's peoples are represented in our borders, My ancestors were from Switzerland and Scotland, and, it's because we're not about ethnicity or race. We're about these ideals, and the ideals are as noble as can be, because our ideals are not about a better life for Americans, they're about a better life for everyone. And that's why so often in our history, now the problem is that here at home, through no fault of our own, through money, and also I think through presidents lying to us about wars, which has been going on a lot in my lifetime, so much of our freedom has been stolen from us. But that doesn't mean that we don't want to get it back.
Yeah, as you were talking about, our ideals, and I believe in my conversations with, other people throughout my lifetime, which is quite a while, is I think the other thing that makes Americans unique, unique isn't the right word. I'm struggling for words, so just bear with me here, is, we don't necessarily want our government going and intervening in we as the people. Now, mind you, that's different than we as the moneyed interests don't want to be involved in other countries' affairs, except that we as individuals are happy to donate our own resources, our own personal resources, to help those. I mean, just for example, my husband and I went to Mexico just last week, and it was Tulum, which has very wealthy people, a lot of Americans moving down there. And then there is your just abject poverty, people living in tin huts, basically. And my husband, he lived in Venezuela for a while, many years ago, and he's always had a really soft spot for these, poorer people. We stayed in a nice hotel, but when we went to eat, he wanted to go to these poorer places. He wanted to support these local, people, and he wanted to stop at the little stands and make sure they were, that we didn't get sick from, sometimes they don't wash their food the way we're used to. The American people want to be a beacon of hope to the rest of the world. And we want to do that with our ideals, and we want to do it with our money, but not through coercion. Just as we don't want people coercing us as individuals, we don't need to do that to other people. And so I think that's amazing. But I do have a question, if you don't mind going a little over here, because I'm always looking at logistics. I'm very fascinated by legislation, and I like to think of all the what ifs. And I love your idea. Obviously, that's why I invited you here.
Okay, good.
I want to support your idea. But the first thing that comes to my mind is, okay, let's say I got X number of dollars in, fund where I can donate to the candidate of my choice. Number one, I feel like I would have to donate early so that they would have the money to run their campaign. But then what if I find out, several months in, or, we always are in favor of these October surprises in the presidential election, that, oh my gosh, this guy he's an absolute criminal or woman, whatever, that they're not the person we thought they were. And here I've been donating to them. Do you have any ideas or thoughts about that?
No, other than, I think there are always going to be people who disappoint us and surprise us in that way. But I think that the money in like the $100 you get in a presidential year, we divide it up into pockets, and there'd be maybe a pocket for the primary and the general. And then within that also, pockets for the race in your congressional district, the Senate race, if there's a senatorial race in your state that year, because it's only 2/3 of the years that there's a Senate race in your state, and then for the presidency. And that will keep you from putting all your money on one horse, and it will keep this or that. It will also prevent sort of social media savvy, charismatic candidates from sucking up all the money in the system. I think, obviously you're always free to donate extra money of your own, but your voter dollars should only go, for races in the House, should only go to the House race in your district, for the Senate race only for your senator, not for other states.
I like that.
But of course, you're free to make additional donations if you want to. But the thing is that most Americans really don't have enough cash lying around that they feel they can afford to give it to politicians. And also, since our small dollar donations really have, so little impact on how the politicians actually behave, it's there's not much incentive at present. And what's remarkable to me in a way, it shows something about the determination of Americans to participate and have some say in their government. How many Americans more and more have been making small dollar donations to some candidates, because small dollar donations are going right up. But unless you make it available for everyone so that all Americans can have some money to donate, it's not going to change the system. I guess, since I think you said that we're going over, I guess, let me just say in conclusion, sort of to people, if you like what I'm doing, how you can help. And, I used to have a donate button on my website, but I removed it because what I really want from my fellow Americans is validation. I go on radio and TV, I speak in person, podcasts, and I make my best case. But the people who hear me don't know me from Adam. But people who know you personally and trust you and respect you, our message about getting money out of politics is always going to be 100 times more powerful coming from you than it will ever be coming from me. And so you shouldn't think that you can't move the ball down your field, because we can. I mean, ultimately, the way this happens is that the word gets out and more Americans tell each other. And you don't even have to necessarily be sold on voter dollars right now. But if you just think that this idea is worth talking about and is interesting, if you can go to my website, and let me give the URL, it's savedemocracyinamerica.org, savedemocracyinamerica.org, or you could Google me, Dan McMillan, Money in Politics. You'll find us quickly enough. And there are links on my website to some of my media interviews, there are FAQs. If you can share our website or some of my interviews on social media, or just email them to friends, or just tell friends in conversation about hearing my conversation with Cheryl today, that's how, because the biggest obstacle we face ultimately, and everyone who's working on reforming the system says this, the same thing, is that we the people have been disappointed so many times, and we've been misled so many times, and we've been promised change so many times without someone delivering, that a lot of Americans have become very pessimistic and feel that the system is so corrupt it's beyond redemption and it can't be fixed. And so the challenge is to give hope. And the way that you can give your fellow Americans hope by telling them and saying, look, this is a good idea. There is an idea out there that can fix that. Because ultimately, as I say, the support is there. The constituency is there for fundamental change. We want change. We're just waiting for someone to show us how. And my argument is that this is how. It's not the only how. There's lots of things that we can do next to further, put ourselves in the driver's seat and compel, our elected and encourage our elected representatives to serve us and to weed out corruption and other problems with the system. But this is probably the single most impactful first step we can take. And it's a step that Republicans and Democrats are willing to take together, and which I think is essential. And so it's, I guess, for those reasons that I know that so many people are discouraged, and I've had a lot of people. I mean, if I had $1 for every time someone compared me to Don Quixote, I'd be a wealthy man. But, I think the odds are in our favor because ultimately we're Americans. We're not just any people. Government by the people is central to who we are. Nobody does it better than we do unless we're thwarted by forces beyond our control. And the idea that the American people will continue to take this line down once enough of us know that there's a way we can fix it, that's preposterous to me. So I personally, if someone were willing to take bets, I'd be happy to give odds that we're going to win this fight. And Cheryl, I thank you so much for giving this opportunity, giving me this opportunity to put my ideas out before our fellow Americans and spread the word.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And because I am in support of your idea and definitely want to share it, a couple things come to my mind that I think could probably easily be addressed with this issue is if people wanted to donate additional monies, that would be great. But, Act Blue and Win Red are the two main grassroots, platforms for small dollar donations from individuals. But they've been hijacked. They've been hijacked by people who take your name and then they take large amounts of money and donate in your name, and you don't even know that they're using your name. So I think that would have to be fixed. But the other thing is, and I really don't know, I'm being very honest where I stand with Citizens United and all that kind of stuff. I've got a libertarian streak in me, but I don't think, and this much I do know, I don't think that a large organization's voice should count more than my voice. If they want a voice, their voice should be equal to my voice. And maybe they are limited in the amount that they can donate. And maybe they have to donate through this platform. Maybe as an organization, they get their $100 or whatever. And sure, so then they have the opportunity to share their voice and make
I mean, if you want to give a major corporation $100, 100 voter dollars, I could live with that.
Yeah, I know.
The current system right now under Citizens United, they can donate billions if they want to super PACs. They can donate unlimited amounts to these entities that can then spend unlimited amounts to help candidates they like or hurt candidates they don't like. And we the people are out in the cold. But
so and I, once again, I thank you. I thank you for sharing this message. And I think any messages of hope that we can share, and I agree with you, this is one solution, and I'm sure there's many out there. And I've promoted other ideas of my own, obviously on my own platform here. But I think that's the other beauty to me of this country is we're a country full of ideas.
We're a very creative society. We're a very creative people.
Right. And our ideas should not divide us. They should unite us. And whether we agree or disagree, we can have a conversation about, well, okay, I may agree with this and you agree with that. And maybe in the end, we come to some kind of conclusion that, we can both live with kind of thing. So anyway, on that note, I
Yeah.
once again will say thank you, and uh, I will certainly be sharing this with as many people as I can. And
Thank you very much, Cheryl. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
all right, thank you for taking the time to be on.
Okay, take care.